Vince was sitting in his deer blind one evening when he could hear something very large moving through the bush behind his blind, along with an absolute pungent odor in the air. His next actions triggered a series of events that have left him questioning what else could be out there. But before we get into his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness. If you've had an encounter or know a story that you would like to have shared on the channel, please email me at the link below. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And the next time you're sitting in your deer blind and you hear something coming up behind you, grab that subscribe button, keep it close so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Vince, and it happened in 2012 up in northeastern Wisconsin. Vince was 38 years old. He was just your average guy. He owned his own contracting business. And because he owned his own business, that allowed him a lot of flexibility to make his own schedule, which allowed for a lot of time for him to pursue his number one passion, which was whitetail hunting. Vince had grown up whitetail hunting with his dad, with his uncle, and he grew up on a little family hobby farm of about 80 acres. Now, even though his family farm was pretty small, only being 80 acres, all the surrounding landowners absolutely loved Vince when he was growing up, and they would allow him to explore around on their properties and hunt on them as well. So Vince spent an absolute ton of time as a kid wandering around in the woods, so he was very at home in the bush, and he knew all the wildlife in that area of Wisconsin. The summer of 2012 was incredibly busy for Vince. He spent the entire summer building cattle fences for various farmers all throughout northeastern Wisconsin. And come the fall, once his business started to wind down, he knew that that was his chance to be able to go spend time in the woods, take as much time as he wanted without really affecting his pay too much. His uncle owned about 160 acres just northeast of Bedford, and that was his number one primary hunting location. It was one of the locations that he had grown up hunting with his dad and with his uncle. So that's where he liked to spend a lot of his time off. And this particular Friday was no different. It was around 12 o'clock. He decided, you know what? I'm done with this for the week. It's been a long week. I just want to go spend some time in the bush, just relax, take it easy. So at about 12 o'clock, he got into his truck. He headed back to his place, grabbed all of his hunting gear, and then he made the drive out to his uncle's property. When he got there, he parked his truck in the ditch on the side of the road where he always would park. He got out, grabbed all of his gear, made his way up the ditch, over the fence, and started making his way across this fairly long field that was about 400 yards long. At the very far end of this field, it kind of dips down, goes into a little bit of a dry creek bed, and that's where he had one of his hunting blinds set up. So he made his way across this field towards his blind, the entire time just anticipating the evening's hunt. He had been out there quite a bit that season. He had been running camera lines for months now. He had quite a few deer patterned and pretty much down to the tee at this point. There was one specific buck that he had his target set on, and that was the buck that he wanted. He had a chance at it the weekend before, but he just could not get this deer to step into the open within range of his bow. So as he's making his way across the field, he just keeps replaying the week before when he had this chance at this buck, and he was really aching to get another opportunity at it. As he got to the part of the field where it dips down and goes towards that creek bed, he looked over to his left. He could see his blind sitting up against the bush line. There was tall grass all around it. He had it really well brushed in, and he was thinking to himself, I don't see how a deer could see this. I'm set up in the perfect spot. I did a great job brushing this blind in. I'm going to get this deer tonight. So he made his way towards his blind, went up behind it, unzipped it, climbed in, and he settled in for the evening's hunt. He sat there for a few hours just watching out into the clearing, waiting for the deer to come, and he noticed that the area was pretty quiet. Now, this area was normally fairly quiet. There was no real busy roads in the area, but this particular night, it was just abnormally silent. He did not hear the typical birds that he would normally hear. He didn't hear squirrels running through the trees. And it didn't really put him on edge. He just thought that it was just a little off, that just, this is just a little too quiet, but you know what? I'm sure everything's fine. As the evening wore on, he couldn't help but think about just how silent the woods really were. He's sitting there thinking to himself, I've been here for a few hours already. I have not seen any deer. I've barely heard any birds. I haven't seen any small animals. Something's just not right tonight. But he figured, what, there's only about 45 minutes of light left. I might as well just sit here. I know I haven't seen any deer yet. They should have come through about an hour ago. But there's still time, and you know what? I'm just going to wait it out. I drove all this way. It would be a waste to walk out now. He sat there for about a half hour longer, so now it's about 15 minutes before the end of legal light, and all of a sudden he could hear something coming through the woods behind him. At first it sounded fairly quiet. He heard the odd little twig snap, so he was thinking that there's a deer coming up behind him. It was coming from the same direction where the deer would typically come from, so he reached over, grabbed his bow, was getting ready, and he just sat there and just listened to this thing come closer and closer. So as he's holding his bow, listening to this thing come closer to him, he realized that the footfalls just sounded off. They did not sound right. They sounded way too heavy to be a deer. So he started to figure that this was a bear coming up behind him. So out of an abundance of caution, he kind of put his bow down, reached down beside him, grabbed his bear spray, and he just kind of held it on his lap just in case this was a bear coming up on him. He sat there for a few seconds, and then he started to notice this just pungent, disgusting smell in the air, the smell of rotting garbage. He, in that moment, thought, okay, this is definitely a bear. This smells just absolutely disgusting. Like, it's almost making me want to vomit. I know there's a garbage dump not too far away, so this is definitely a bear. So now he's thinking, great, he has this bear to contend with. So he sat there listening to this thing just get closer and closer behind his blind, and after a few seconds, it was directly behind him, almost pretty much right on top of him. At this point, he decided he was going to alert this bear, so he just let out a, "Hey, bear," hoping that by doing that, this bear would turn around and just wander away or it would take off. When he said, "Hey, bear," the footsteps just completely stopped, and now he's sitting inside of his tent going, okay, I just alerted this bear. It should have run off. It just stopped. It's probably staring directly at me. This is not a good situation to be in. So he pulled up his bear spray. He slid off the safety lever, held it close by his chest, thinking that at any second, this bear is just going to come barreling into his blind and he's going to have to use his bear spray to defend himself. After a few more seconds, he did not hear any more movement from this bear. He didn't hear it take a step closer. He couldn't even hear it breathing, but he could smell that smell even stronger now. So again, he decides, I'm going to say, "Hey, bear," one more time, see if I could get a reaction out of this bear. So again, he goes, "Hey, bear," and again, absolutely nothing. At this point, Vince is like, okay, this is not normal. This is not a good situation. I've alerted this bear twice. It has not reacted. I do not hear it breathing. And this smell is just absolutely horrendous. The smell was even worse than it was before, and Vince was almost gagging on it at this point. So at this point, he decided he wasn't just going to gently alert this bear. He was actually going to yell at it to try to get any reaction whatsoever out of it. So he just yelled at the top of his lungs, "Get out of here!" As soon as he yelled that, he was just immediately overtaken with just this absolute intense feeling of dread, and he could not figure out where this feeling was coming from. But even though he yelled at this bear at the top of his lungs, there was no reaction from it at all. Now Vince is sitting in his blind, his heart's beating out of his chest. He knows that he is not in a good situation, but now he's starting to wonder, like, is this a bear? Like, what else could this be out there? I've yelled at it now and nothing. So Vince tries to take a couple of deep breaths just to calm down. Then he yells again at the absolute top of his lungs, as loud as he can yell, just "Get out of here!" at this bear. As soon as he yelled that, he hears this low, deep, raspy voice just say, "Leave." At this point, Vince is kind of shocked. He's like, okay, this isn't a bear. This is some dude. Who is this? Why did this person sneak up behind my blind? This person knows I'm here. Why are they doing this? And he's like, why do they smell so just absolutely disgusting? So now thinking that this is some random guy behind his blind messing with him, Vince started just yelling profanities at this guy. Vince at this point was kind of in full-on fight mode because now he's just absolutely ticked off that somebody would creep up behind him, do this, and ruin his hunt. So he grabs his stuff, turns around, unzips the tent, goes to step out to confront this guy, give him a piece of his mind. He looked up and there was this big pine bough from this big pine tree about 15 yards away, and that bough was kind of swaying as if something just ran by it, brushed up against it. He stood up, looked directly towards that pine tree, trying to find any sign of this guy that had been outside of his blind. He didn't see anybody, so he's trying to figure out, like, hey, this does not make sense. This guy was clearly directly behind my blind. I did not hear him take off. So he decides, again, just to yell, get out of here, just so that this guy would know that he's onto him and that he was not messing around. As soon as he yelled, get out of here, he saw that same pine bough start to move, and all of a sudden, standing directly behind this pine bough, standing about 9.5 feet tall, he sees this dark, blackish brown Sasquatch step from behind the pine tree looking directly at him. Vince at this point kind of took a step back, just in absolute disbelief of what he was seeing in front of him. He could not help himself in this moment but just stare back at this Sasquatch. Now, this Sasquatch was only about 15 yards away from him, so he got a very good look at its face. He describes his face as being a lot more human looking than ape. He said its eyes, they weren't very widespread. He said the eye color was brownish black. Its nose was a little bit bigger. He said it was kind of more of a flat nose, kind of flared out. Its lips at first were pressed firmly together. He said that its face was partially hair covered, but the hair that it did have around the side of its head looked very matted and very unkempt. He stood there looking at this Sasquatch when all of a sudden it opened its mouth and he could see that it had flat teeth, very similar to human teeth. And as soon as it opened its mouth, he heard that voice again, just saying, leave. Now, he did not know in this moment if this Sasquatch actually spoke to him or if he heard this voice in his head, but he did not want to hang around and try to figure this out. As soon as he heard that voice say, leave, he kind of took another step back, kind of just in a calm voice. He was like, hey, I'm leaving. I don't want any trouble. Kind of backed up as he made his way around his blind. When he got onto the field, he turned, kind of headed towards the middle of the field, and at a semi-quick pace just started heading directly back to his truck. The entire time as he was making his way back across that field, he kept turning around, looking back towards his blind, and he could see this Sasquatch the entire time standing by his blind, just watching him make his way across the field. When he got to his truck, quickly hopped in, and then he drove over to his uncle's house. Now, Vince's uncle's house was not on that particular property. It was actually located about 1.5 miles down the road. So as Vince made his drive to his uncle's house, he was just in absolute disbelief of everything that he had just experienced, and he was having a very hard time calming down. His heart was just absolutely racing. He was having a hard time breathing, and he just wanted to talk to his uncle to find out if his uncle knew anything about this and kind of just give his uncle a heads up, because his uncle was older and his uncle spent a lot of time on that property. So when he got to his uncle's property, he pulled onto the driveway. He saw his uncle outside working on a quad. He parked his truck and he almost pretty much jogged directly over to his uncle. And as soon as he got to his uncle just kind of looked up, let out a sigh, because he could see just the fear on Vince's face. And his uncle, without missing a beat, said, "You saw it, didn't you?" At that moment, Vince was like, "Okay, we need to talk. You have to tell me everything." The two of them, they made their way over towards the barn. They sat down. Vince told his uncle exactly what he had experienced. And his uncle went on to tell Vince that, yeah, he had seen this Sasquatch before, that there were actually multiple of them in that area on that property, and he had seen them before. But what really stuck out to Vince was the fact that his uncle said, "You don't have to worry about them. There's much worse things in the woods." Vince asked his uncle what he meant by that, but his uncle just said, "I can't talk about it. I will not talk about it. All you need to know is there's much worse things out there." Vince at this point was completely confused, tried to press his uncle more, but his uncle just would not give up any more information. I don't know about you, but I have to give Vince props for the way that he handled himself during this encounter. A lot of people probably would have panicked and just booked it back to their truck. He managed to stay fairly calm and collected that entire time. But I would like to know your guys' thoughts on this one. I have heard stories before of Sasquatch being able to mimic and vocalize, even send messages kind of telepathically. So if you have any thoughts on this, please leave it in the comments below. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.